It's like your brain overloads and you just can't think anymore. Like your head is about to explode. The lights, the sounds, everything. It's just too much.
Okay.
I've always felt lonely. I never really participated in life. I guess people just tolerated me. It's hard to put into words what it feels like to be on the outside, looking in.
I remember how desperate I felt at the age of 3 because I couldn't speak. I understood the words people said to me, but I couldn't force a single word out in response. It felt like an extreme case of stuttering, and it drove me mad. I vividly remember thinking logically and realizing that the only way I could communicate was to scream.
The world has changed. What was useful and beneficial yesterday has become harmful and even dangerous today. For example, this. We'll explore how these changes affected each of us and our children. But first, let's start with a riddle. What is the synthetic material that once littered the streets or the oceans that are now found inside of us? It's plastics. And they're truly everywhere. Today, nearly 500 million tons of plastics are produced each year, and more than 90% of them will end up as garbage. So, what does it mean for us? In this video, we'll talk about the hidden dangers behind plastic pollution, and specifically, how micro and nanoplastics are affecting human health. Experts who studied this issue firsthand have no doubt about the severity of the situation. Take autism spectrum disorder as an example. The current projections suggest that within a generation, 1 in every 2 children, that is 50% of children, could be diagnosed with autism. And these aren't just statistics. They're children around us, the families we know, and the society that we live in. But autism is just the tip of the iceberg. The problem is much broader, and it concerns every one of us. That is what today's documentary will be about.
The year 1911. Swiss scientist Eugen Bleuler first introduced the term autism, meaning isolated self. At the time, it was linked to schizophrenia. Time passes. In the 1970s, Dr. Darold Treffert studied autism and concluded that it is an extremely rare phenomenon, affecting fewer than 1 in 10,000 children. But something changed in the late 80s. In America, the number of autism cases began to rise.
I will say that 1 in 36, that's not a pandemic, then what is? 1 in 36, and it used to be 1 in 10,000, have autism now?
Over the past 50 years, the prevalence of autism in the US has increased 277 times. Studies on the prevalence of autism have been conducted in at least 37 countries. All of them show similar trends. Today, 1 in 100 children worldwide is diagnosed with autism in early childhood. At the current rate of progression in the coming decades, every second child will be born with autism. Every second child. Trap for humanity.
In 1970, autism spectrum disorder affected just 1 in every 10,000 children. Today, that number has surged to 1 in 36, or nearly 3% of children. And if the trend continues, 1 in every 2, or every other children will suffer from autism within a generation. This is truly a crisis that demands immediate attention. So let's find out what's driving this alarming increase, and more importantly, how we can prevent it. We'll have to examine the full range of possible factors and their impact on our bodies. So let's dive in.
Autism, or autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a neurological and behavioral condition characterized by difficulties in social communication, repetitive behaviors, and restricted interests.
Children with autism spectrum disorders and their families face numerous challenges in their lives, in everyday situations, especially when it comes to socializing, which simultaneously affects social interaction, communication, adaptation, and more. Such children often struggle with recognizing facial expressions, like understanding language or tone of voice, and they also have trouble with social engagement, expressing their requests and needs. They show a lack of spontaneous interest in communicating with others, limited use of speech, and sometimes even an unusual way of using it.
Autism is considered a disorder caused by a mix of genetic and environmental factors, with a significant portion of cases linked to genetic predisposition. Upon closer examination of the genetic causes of autism, it becomes clear that about 80% of them remain unknown or are multifactorial. This raises the question, could the environment play a significant role in this process? In recent decades, the natural environment around us has undergone significant changes. It has become heavily contaminated with various harmful substances, heavy metals, pesticides, and toxins. At the same time, the planet is experiencing a profound climate crisis. All these factors may have significantly contributed to the rise in diseases. But there is another hidden and insidious enemy, one that is not yet making global headlines, but its impact is undeniable. This is micro and nanoplastics. No matter where we take samples, water, air, soil, it is everywhere. We eat it, we drink it, we breathe it in. And the greatest danger lies in its ability to penetrate our bodies down to the molecular level. A comparison of graphs and a clear correlation urge a deeper investigation into the role of plastic pollution in the development of autism. Every year, the world produces over 400 million tons of plastic waste. According to projections, this figure will triple by 2040. Plastic requires 500 to 1,000 years to decompose. The Environmental Protection Agency has stated that nearly 100% of all plastic ever created by humans still exists. This waste does not disappear. It continues to accumulate, including in the human body. The film Anthropogenic Factor in the Ocean's Demise presents evidence that today, the entire world ocean is permeated with microplastics. These tiny particles infiltrate every drop of oceanic water. Just as 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water, the human body is also made up of 70% water. Not only is every drop of the ocean filled with nanoplastics, but these nanoplastics are also present in our bodies. Where do micro and nanoplastics come from? Microplastic particles are formed when various types of plastics break down. When plastic enters the ocean, it is exposed to sunlight and friction, causing it to disintegrate into tiny particles invisible to the naked eye. But the process doesn't stop there. It continues breaking down further, all the way to the molecular level. These particles, known as micro and nanoplastics, retain their polymer structure. Beyond their polymer composition, micro and nanoplastics also contain various hazardous substances typically added during plastic production. On top of that, micro and nanoplastics act like sponges, absorbing dangerous chemical compounds. As a result, bisphenols, phthalates, dioxins, heavy metals, and other pollutants enter living organisms, along with the microplastic particles. This ability of microplastics is known as the Trojan horse effect. Escaping them today is nearly impossible. Toxic additives are everywhere. For instance, phthalates are found in vinyl flooring, stretch ceilings, shower curtains, and children's toys. Bisphenol A, another common plastic additive, is present in water bottles, including baby bottles, reusable food containers, medical instruments, dental fillings, paper, and cardboard. While toxic substances are harmful, the greatest threat comes from plastic's ability to accumulate static charges and retain them in the body. But more on that later. Microplastics are everywhere. Particles of micro and nanoplastics are tiny plastic fragments that have become new inhabitants of our planet. Wind and precipitation carry microplastics even to the most remote corners of the Earth. They're everywhere, from the highest point, Mount Everest, to the deepest Mariana Trench. The entire world ocean is saturated with microplastics. Every drop of ocean water contains these tiny plastic particles. As water evaporates, microplastics rise into the atmosphere from the ocean's surface and can be carried by the wind across the entire planet. They also become part of the sea breeze we breathe. Each year, approximately 136,000 metric tons of microplastics are blown on shore by the sea breeze. Now, when we swim in the ocean, sunbathe on the beach, or jog along the shore in an effort to stay healthy, we're only increasing the impact of microplastics on our bodies. Micro and nanoplastics rising from the surface of oceans and seas are dispersed throughout the atmosphere. Forests, like sponges, absorb them. Poor ventilation beneath dense forest canopies leads to a constant buildup of these particles in the treetops. Unlike forests, cities have good airflow, and the air doesn't stagnate. Additionally, heavier suspensions from vehicle exhaust and industrial smog partially settle micro and nanoplastics. The air in forests is far more dangerous to human health than in megacities due to an excess of nanoplastics. Research has shown that over 14 months, more than 1,000 tons of plastic particles fell with precipitation in 11 national parks and reserves in the western United States, enough to produce 120 million plastic bottles. A similar situation is observed in other countries. The Quercus serrata forests of Japan trap approximately 420 trillion airborne microplastics per year in their canopies, said Natsu Tsunaga. Plastic pollution is detrimental to tree functioning, causing oxidative stress and reducing the efficiency of photosynthesis. Because of this, some of the solar energy is no longer used to create nutrients, and excess light can damage plants, almost like burning them. To protect themselves, trees activate photoprotection mechanisms, dissipating excess light as heat. Microplastics from Africa and North America have been found in the French Pyrenees, in the air at an altitude of 2,877 meters, 9,439 feet above sea level, and even in croissants on the Champs-Élysées. Researcher Emily Rowlands noted that the concentration of microplastics identified in Antarctica was 100 times higher than previously estimated. Micro and nanoplastics enter urban water bodies through stormwater runoff, industrial emissions, and even rain, which captures these particles from the air. For example, a single wash of synthetic fabrics can release up to 1.5 million microplastic particles into wastewater. Once in the wastewater, these particles flow into rivers and oceans, where they are ingested by fish and other aquatic creatures. Ultimately, the microplastics come back to humans, ending up on their plates in the form of fish or seafood. Italian scientists have discovered that fruits and vegetables also contain millions of microplastic particles. They found that microplastic particles enter plants through their root systems, along with water during irrigation or rainfall. These particles travel up the stems and accumulate in the leaves and fruits. Their study, published in the journal Environmental Research, revealed that the highest concentrations of microplastics are found in apples, pears, carrots, lettuce, and broccoli. Moreover, the concentration of particles in fruits was 2 to 3 times higher than in vegetables, ranging from 52,000 particles per gram in lettuce to 223,000 in apples. Scientists from the University of Newcastle, Australia, set out to determine how much plastic a modern person consumes. They found that on average, a person ingests 250 grams of plastic per year, equivalent to 50 plastic bags. Penetration of plastic particles into the brain.
So micro and nanoplastics are now everywhere, and they enter our bodies through the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the food that we eat. For example, the water in this bottle. Drinking water from a plastic bottle is familiar and convenient to us. But with every sip, we ingest several thousand particles of plastic that accumulate and damage our bodies. And this isn't because of the plastic bottle itself, but because the water that fills this bottle, whether it is made of plastic or glass, already contains tiny fragments of plastics. There was a time when rain symbolized purity and walks by the sea or in the forests were considered beneficial for health. But today the reality is far different. Research has shown that the air in the open water bodies and forests, they contain high concentrations of micro and nanoplastics. That is, these natural environments are now a major threat to our health. And what about eating healthy? Fruits and vegetables are excellent sources of vitamins and foundation of a nutritious diet. But nowadays, even organically grown produce is not safe anymore because it also contains micro and nanoplastics. They settle on the surface from the air or get absorbed from the soil and water. So every time we choose a healthy product, we unknowingly consume toxic particles. And today, fruits and vegetables, even those grown in greenhouses, are more dangerous than the carcinogens in fast food. And we're left with a dilemma. That is, consume fruits and vegetables for essential vitamins and nutrients, but ingest toxic plastics along with them, or avoid them altogether and risk depriving our bodies of vital nourishment. And the real danger is the fact that plastics don't break down in our bodies. Instead, they accumulate in our organs. And this eventually ends up inside of us, and most heavily in our brains.
The human body is equipped with a unique protective mechanism, without which we would be vulnerable to countless diseases. This mechanism safeguards the most critical organ, the brain. The blood-brain barrier is an incredibly complex and vital system within our brain. It carefully filters substances traveling from the bloodstream into the brain, shielding it from toxins and infections. This barrier is made up of specialized cells that form tight junctions, preventing harmful substances from reaching the brain. The blood-brain barrier doesn't just block everything indiscriminately. Its function is finely tuned, ensuring a balance between protection and supplying the brain with what it needs. But even this remarkable natural mechanism has proven powerless against human-made pollutants. Scientists have discovered that micro and nanoplastic particles, once inside the body, can cross the blood-brain barrier, entering the brain directly from the bloodstream. Research has shown that nanoparticles can breach this barrier just a few hours after entering the body. Moreover, there's another route for micro and nanoplastics to reach the brain. When we inhale air through the nose, nanoplastic particles travel along the olfactory nerves directly to the brain area responsible for smell processing. As a result, they take a shorter and more direct path to the brain than to other organs. This explains why brain tissue samples were found to contain 7 to 30 times more microplastics than samples from the liver and kidneys. The predominant particles in the brain were tiny fragments or flakes of polyethylene, one of the most widely used plastics in packaging. Essentially, the brain of a modern human is turning into a plastic waste bin, the equivalent of an entire plastic spoon. That's roughly the amount of microplastic in our brains. The concentrations we saw in the brain tissue of normal individuals, who had an average age of around 45 or 50 years old, were 4,800 micrograms of plastic particles per gram, or 0.48% by weight. That would mean that our brains today are 99.5% brain, and the rest is plastic, explained Matthew Campen, lead researcher from the University of New Mexico. How does our body respond to such an invasion? Nanoplastics, penetrating the blood vessels of the brain, trigger inflammation of the inner vascular lining, the endothelium. When inflammation occurs, the blood-brain barrier becomes more permeable, making it easier for various pathogens like viruses, bacteria, and microplastics to enter the brain. Immune cells engulf these foreign plastic particles, but since plastic doesn't break down, it causes these cells to deform and increase in size. Accumulating in the brain's small blood vessels, they contribute to the formation of microthrombi, which disrupt blood supply and microcirculation, increasing the risk of stroke even at a young age. As a result, nanoplastic particles impair the supply of oxygen and nutrients to brain cells, leading to chronic hypoxia and the gradual death of neurons. These processes drive neurodegenerative changes, including brain atrophy, which, with prolonged exposure, can lead to a reduction in the volume of specific brain structures. Due to their tiny size, nanoplastics can even penetrate inside nerve cells, neurons. Once inside, they cause oxidative stress, which disrupts mitochondrial function, the transport of substances across cell membranes, and can lead to DNA strand breaks. In response to such damage, the cell activates self-repair mechanisms, but if the damage is too extensive, the repair system begins to falter, either fixing DNA incorrectly or failing to correct errors altogether. As a result, mutations occur in the cells. This leads to disrupted cellular processes and, ultimately, cell death. Nanoplastics also damage the myelin sheath structure of axons, impairing the transmission of nerve impulses between neurons. This results in memory decline and cognitive impairment, ranging from mild disturbances to severe forms, including dementia. According to research, individuals with dementia had 3 to 5 times higher concentrations of microplastic in their brains than healthy individuals. This may be linked to their habit of spending time in nature, breathing in sea breezes or forest air saturated with microplastics. Moreover, exposure to micro and nanoplastics contributes to the development of Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and encephalopathy. It also increases the risk of neuropsychiatric disorders, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism. This isn't surprising, as autism is tied to disruptions in the formation of neural connections and synaptic signaling. Most studies suggest that things will only get worse. Between 2016 and 2024, over just 8 years, the amount of plastic in the human brain increased by 50%. Given the ongoing rise in plastic production and the growing presence of its particles in the atmosphere, water, and food, it's safe to say that the amount of nanoplastics in our brains will continue to increase. If this trend persists, then in 4 years, plastic levels in the brain will rise by another 50%. That means by 2028, alongside the plastic spoon in our brains, there will be a plastic fork as well. This illustrates the scale of the problem and its alarming consequences for our health. Changes in the microbiota.
When micro and nanoplastics penetrate the brain, they trigger inflammation and damage neurons, the cells that are responsible for thoughts, emotions, and ability to communicate. Imagine a complex highway road system, extremely busy with thousands of cars passing through. But over time, large potholes form, bridges collapse, and broken cars block the lanes, all disrupting the traffic flows. This is how micro nanoplastics impact the neural connections in our brains. And consequently, conditions like dementia, which was once considered an illness of an old age, are now increasingly impacting young people. Studies show that small plastic fragments can impair memory, focus, and cognitive function. They cloud our ability to perceive and engage with the world. Also, if you often forget simple information, misplaced objects, or experience absent-mindedness. This could be a sign that these micro nanoplastics have accumulated in our brains, and their effects are becoming more apparent. But what's really concerning is that these changes, the decline of the brain's basic function, may become irreversible, and the brain is just one organ. So what about other parts of our body? What else is micro nanoplastics affecting, and how so? Let's find out.
The gut is often called our second brain. Recent research suggests our gut microbiomes also affect brain communication and neurological health. Certain neuropsychiatric disorders are accompanied by an imbalance in gut flora. Scientists have been able to identify children with autism with up to 82% accuracy simply by analyzing their gut microbiota and digestive system functions. These children show changes in their gut microbiome composition, including alterations in bacteria, viruses, and fungi. But what's behind this connection? Micro and nanoplastics can carry an electrostatic charge. It turns out that some microorganisms can use these charged micro and nanoplastic particles as a convenient platform for growth, much like plants rooting on rocks. Bacteria and fungi are particularly successful colonizers of such surfaces, and the electric fields around nanoplastics can influence biological processes, encouraging the rapid proliferation of fungi. This means nanoplastics support the survival of bacteria, viruses, and fungi, acting as a kind of charging station for these microorganisms. In studies conducted on water fleas, Daphnia, in 2023 at the Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium, researchers found that nanoplastics caused oxidative stress and genotoxicity in their bodies. This facilitated fungal infections in the system. Specifically, the infection rates of the fungal parasite Mechnicovia were 11 times higher in the presence of nanoplastics. New data indicate that the incidence and geographic range of fungal diseases are expanding. Emerging from the shadows of the bacterial antimicrobial resistance pandemic, fungal infections are growing and are ever more resistant to treatments, becoming a public health concern worldwide, said Dr. Hanan Balki, Assistant Director General for Antimicrobial Resistance at the WHO. Some studies suggest that certain fungi can release metabolites or substances that may accelerate tumor growth or contribute to inflammatory processes linked to cancer development. The DNA of specific fungal species is fairly common in certain types of tumors. The body's ecosystem is an incredibly complex network of interactions, where the balance of different microorganisms plays a crucial role. When charged plastic particles interfere with this system, they can promote the excessive growth of certain organisms like fungi while suppressing others. It's similar to a situation where weeds suddenly overtake a garden, crowding out beneficial plants. Additionally, the impact of plastic particles on cell membranes and the buildup of toxins can weaken the body's immune system, making it more susceptible to pathogenic fungi and bacteria. And so, statically charged particles are not just inert pieces of pollution. They actively interact with cells, triggering mutations, creating favorable conditions for fungal growth, and potentially disrupting the microbiological balance of ecosystems. Their influence sets off a chain reaction of changes, the full consequences of which have yet to be fully explored. Viruses and nanoplastics.
Micro and nanoplastics are not just pollutants in our bodies. They also act as carriers for bacteria and fungi, providing an ideal surface to spread and grow. On one hand, these plastic particles are like shuttles that allow microbes to easily move through our bodies, infiltrating our internal systems. On the other hand, micro nanoplastics can accumulate static charge, which attracts microbes. And this helps them to reproduce and mutate faster, and thus become more resistant and aggressive. Consequently, the balance of microbiomes is disrupted. The immune system is weakened, and the number of acute and chronic diseases is growing with increasing severity and resistance to treatments. But what happens when not bacteria or fungi, but viruses interact with micro and nanoplastics? Let's take a closer look and explore what that means for our health and our environment.
Numerous plastic particles floating in rivers and lakes attract viruses to their surfaces. These pathogens not only find a safe haven, but also a small, high-speed vessel that carries them over long distances. Viruses that attach to micro and nanoplastics can remain infectious for longer, and thanks to staying on these surfaces for extended time, they may develop new genetic variations. Such conditions can enhance their contagiousness and lead to the emergence of new properties. Plastic particles collect viruses on their surfaces through chemical bonds, electrostatic forces, and hydrophobic interactions. This makes the viruses more resistant to external factors like ultraviolet radiation, temperature, or chemicals, thereby prolonging their infectiousness. Professor Richard Quilliam, lead researcher at the University of Stirling, said, "We found that viruses can attach to microplastics, which allows them to survive in the water for 3 days, possibly longer. Being infectious in the environment for 3 days, that's long enough to get from the wastewater treatment works to the public beach," said Quilliam. In other words, viruses attached to nanoplastics can remain infectious longer than they would in a free-floating state. Nanoplastics can transport viruses over great distances through air, water, and living organisms. We weren't sure how well viruses could survive by hitchhiking on plastic in the environment, but they do survive, and they do remain infectious. Microplastics can influence how viruses interact with host cells by altering the conditions of their environment. For example, nanoplastics may weaken the protective mechanisms of cells, potentially making it easier for viruses to multiply. Moreover, microplastics can create conditions for interactions between viruses and bacteria, facilitating the exchange of genetic material. This could increase bacterial resistance to antibiotics. Such processes may contribute to the spread of pathogens and increase the risk of emerging infectious threats. The microplastic threat to emerging life.
So we've already seen how viruses and bacteria use micro nanoplastics to grow, mutate, and spread further. But this is just part of a more complex issue. We live in a world where the air we breathe contains not only microscopic plastic particles, but also microbes, viruses, and bacteria. This means that with every breath, we're not only inhaling micro nanoplastics, but also pathogens that can infect our bodies and disrupt our natural protective mechanisms. But this raises another question. How early do these micro and nanoplastics start entering our bodies? And how do they impact development and functioning of our bodies from the moment the life begins?
The first 1,000 days of life, from conception to the age of 2, are critical for the development of the brain and the entire body. During this period, special mechanisms regulate gene activity, which can be activated or suppressed by external factors such as nutrition, stress, and the environment. These changes can affect not only the individual, but also their children and grandchildren. In this time, the foundations are laid for brain function, the immune system, metabolism, and even psychological traits. Parental health plays a vital role in the health of their child. In 2020, a study led by Antonio Ragusa examined 6 women with normal pregnancies. Scientists analyzed their placentas using Raman microspectroscopy. It turned out that the placentas of 4 of these women contained 12 microplastic particles each, measuring between 5 and 10 micrometers, with varying shapes and colors. 3 of them were identified as polypropylene, while the others contained pigments used in paints, adhesives, cosmetics, and hygiene products. Scientists discovered that micro and nanoplastic particles, once inside placental cells, cause oxidative stress, leading to programmed cell death, inflammation, and disruptions in endocrine metabolism within human placental cells. All of this suppresses intrauterine fetal growth to varying degrees, depending on the amount of nanoplastics in the body. As we already know, the body's protective mechanisms perceive microplastics as foreign substances, triggering local immune responses. This disruption of immune balance leads to various issues in early pregnancy, including spontaneous abortion, fetal growth restriction, preterm delivery, and stillbirth. The reason is that penetrating the fetus, nanoplastics accumulate within it, causing the mother's body to reject it. Studies of aborted fetal tissues paint a grim picture. The significant presence of nanoparticles in the fetus triggers pregnancy termination, fetal rejection, and a range of pathologies, acting like an invisible enemy that destroys life before it even begins. This also explains difficulties with conception. Men's reproductive health is likewise affected by the toxic impact of plastics. Research by Chinese toxicologists in 2024 revealed that sperm is even more sensitive to the accumulation of pollutants than blood. Scientists found microplastics in all semen samples, with an average of 2 particles per sample, measuring up to 7.02 micrometers. Polystyrene was the most prevalent type, appearing in 31% of cases. Scientists also observed sperm morphological abnormalities in the presence of microplastics, as well as changes in telomere length. Short telomeres are linked to accelerated cell aging and impaired functioning, which can affect reproductive health and lifespan. Similarly, microplastics accumulate in the ovaries, reducing follicle size and embryo development. A study by Korean scientists experimentally demonstrates the impact of microplastics before and after birth as a potential risk factor for autism spectrum disorders. Autism is considered a neuropsychiatric disorder, meaning it emerges during the early stages of brain development. It turns out that the preconditions for autism arise not only before a person's birth, but even before their conception. Micro and nanoplastics are found in seminal and follicular fluids, as well as in the placenta and umbilical cord blood, which indicates their potential presence in the embryo from the earliest stages of development. This period is critical, as it lays the foundation for the future child's body. Exposure to nanoplastics at this stage can cause significant harm to the embryo, potentially affecting its further development. Starting from the embryonic period and the first years of life, the human nervous system takes shape. Proteins play a key role at every step of this process. It's known that changes in the structure and functioning of proteins in nervous tissues are particularly significant in the development of numerous disorders, including autism. Recent studies have shown that nanoplastics interact with proteins mainly through weak interactions, such as hydrophobic interactions, hydrogen bonds, van der Waals forces, and electrostatic forces. As a result of these interactions, protein molecules deform in the presence of nanoplastics. This can lead to severe developmental defects, including brain, heart, and bone abnormalities. Right after birth, newborns are exposed to new doses of nano and microplastics, now from the outside world. Infants explore the world by tasting everything they encounter. This makes them especially vulnerable to ingesting microplastics. Nearly everything made for children, from colorful toys to bright dishes and furniture, is made of plastic. According to a 2020 study, infants can ingest up to 4.5 million plastic particles per day simply by being fed from polypropylene bottles. These bottles make up the majority of baby bottles used worldwide. But even if a child isn't drinking from a plastic bottle, it doesn't shield them from microplastics entering their bodies. Infants can also ingest microplastics through breast milk. A 2022 study revealed that plastic particles were present in 76% of breast milk samples taken from 34 healthy mothers. With this trend of plastic contamination, the concentration of these particles in breast milk is only expected to rise. It was also discovered that the level of certain microplastics in the feces of infants is 14 times higher than in adults. The high concentration of nanoplastic particles has a destructive impact on a child's body. As a result, new generations will become increasingly prone to genetic mutations and disorders. Endocrine disruptors.
Even before birth, children receive their first dose of micro-nanoplastics from parents whose bodies have accumulated them. They're literally passing down tiny plastics to children. And this is what we're giving to our children into their brains. Sounds horrible, right? But this is a reality that we're facing today. After degrading and breaking down into micro and nanoplastics, small pieces of this will enter our children's bodies through air, water, food, and they will accumulate in their brains and other organs. But this is only a part of the story because every plastic particle is coated with dyes and packed with toxic additives. Like micro and nanoplastics, these chemicals also accumulate in our bodies and disrupt cellular functions with long-term consequences.
In 1891, Russian chemist Alexander Dyanin synthesized an organic compound from the phenol class, bisphenol, through a reaction of acetone with phenol in the presence of a catalyst. 45 years later, in 1936, it was discovered that bisphenol is a synthetic analog of estrogen, one of the 4 female hormones. While bisphenol proved unsuitable for medical use, it became a real breakthrough in plastic production. Dr. Peter Machnik states the following: "It is well known that numerous disorders in the nervous system of vertebrates are triggered by the fact that excitatory signals and inhibitory signals are not or only inadequately coordinated. So it is all the more alarming that the plasticizers BPA and BPS significantly impair precisely this coordination. When the harmful effects of bisphenol A were proven, companies began phasing it out, often replacing it with bisphenol S-based compounds. Bisphenol S was developed as a substitute for bisphenol A, but has a similar chemical structure. It is used in thermal receipt printing, plastics, and packaging. This compound shares much of the same structure and chemical composition as bisphenol A and causes many of the same problems. People use this chemical to replace BPA without sufficient toxicological information," says Kyung-Ho Choi, an environmental toxicologist at Seoul National University. A group of scientists led by Wade V. Welshans found that high concentrations of bisphenol S produce the same effects as bisphenol A. When the brain cells are exposed to small amounts of BPA or BPS for a month, the damage is unmistakable, says Elizabeth Shermer, a doctoral student from Bayreuth and an author of a study on bisphenols. It turns out that the plasticizers influence the action potential of brain cells. They alter the chemical and electrical transmission of signals through the synapses. In addition, plasticizers disrupt pathways that are crucial for perceiving and processing acoustic and visual stimuli. Biologists from the University of Bayreuth warn, the findings obtained through studies on fish brains justify the assessment that BPA and BPS can also seriously damage the brains of adult humans. Studies published by the Earth Day Project in 2023 found higher levels of phthalates and bisphenol A in children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder compared to children without this condition. What are the mechanisms behind the influence of these substances? In the body, bisphenol mimics the hormone estrogen, disrupting critical processes such as cell growth, repair, reproduction, and fetal development. Although estrogen is known as a female sex hormone, it plays an important role in men as well. Research by Australian scientists at the Florey Department of Neuroscience and Mental Health in Melbourne revealed a striking finding. Boys whose mothers had high levels of bisphenol A in their urine during late pregnancy were 6 times more likely to exhibit autism symptoms by the age of 11 compared to boys whose mothers had lower BPA levels. Professor Anne-Louise Ponsonby explained, BPA can disrupt hormone-controlled male fetal brain development in several ways, including silencing a key enzyme, aromatase, that controls neurohormones and is especially important in fetal male brain development. This appears to be part of the autism puzzle. This may help explain the gender disparity in autism, where there are approximately 4 to 5 boys diagnosed per every girl. This suggests a potential decline in the male population due to this disorder and the concurrent rise in male infertility. The study also found that bisphenol levels in infertile men were twice as high as those in men with normal reproductive capabilities. While autism is less common in girls, they suffer from it in a more severe form. Additionally, BPA exposure in girls may lead to hormonal imbalances, particularly disruptions in estrogen levels. This increases their risk for conditions such as breast cancer, endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, and other disorders. Exposure to plastic chemicals during pregnancy has already been shown in some studies to be associated with subsequent autism in offspring, said Professor Anne-Louise Ponsonby, head of Florey's Neuroepidemiology Research Group. Every year, 8 million tons of bisphenol A are produced worldwide, with 100 tons released into the biosphere annually. This makes bisphenol A ubiquitous in the environment, found everywhere from surface water to breast milk. Other organs in the body targeted by microplastics.
Human hormones are gradually being replaced by plasticizers, and this process has been happening quietly at an imperceptible level. We're getting sick without even understanding what's happening inside of us. But in reality, micro and nanoplastics are entering our bodies with every breath, penetrating further into our systems, and they're slowly destroying everything from within, contributing to autoimmune disorders, hormonal imbalances, and reduced cognitive abilities. Over time, it becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish common illnesses from those triggered by micro and nanoplastics. Note that today, more and more people, regardless of age, are experiencing headaches, panic attacks, depression, sleep disorders, obesity, diabetes, and all these symptoms will become more widespread as the concentration of micro and nanoplastics in the environment continues to rise. Now, a question. Why are common medications losing their effectiveness? We treat symptoms, yet they keep coming back. And why do mild illnesses develop into chronic conditions or become more severe?
Microplastics have been detected in nearly all human tissues, including hair, lungs, kidneys, liver, and spleen. They have also been found in meconium, breast milk, placenta, blood, and urine. Exposure to phthalates, which are present in plastics, increases the risk of developing childhood cancers by 20%. Specifically, the incidence of bone cancer has tripled, while the rates of lymphoma and blood cancers have doubled. It is projected that by 2050, the number of new cancer cases will rise by 77%. Studies confirm that chemical additives in plastics contribute to developing obesity. According to the World Health Organization, the worldwide prevalence of obesity more than doubled between 1990 and 2022. It has also been proven that exposure to bisphenol A is associated with an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Research indicates that exposure to micro and nanoparticles leads to higher blood glucose concentration and insulin resistance. Diabetes-related mortality increased markedly worldwide. Nanoplastics affect not only the brain but also the bone marrow, where they accumulate and interfere with stem cell formation. Stem cells, like universal builders within our bodies, have the remarkable ability to transform into any type of cell. They form red and white blood cells, platelets, as well as cells that can transform into bone, cartilage, and fat tissues. By damaging stem cells, nanoplastics cause irreparable harm to all the body's organs and tissues. Studies have shown that micro and nanoparticles in arteries are a significant risk factor for cardiovascular diseases. These particles harm blood cells, weaken the immune system, and trigger inflammation and vascular damage. Nanoparticles disrupt the normal function of blood proteins and cause red blood cell and platelet aggregation, which can lead to thrombosis, heart diseases, and vascular conditions. Research also indicates that microplastics can accumulate in atherosclerotic plaques within carotid arteries, increasing the risk of heart attack and stroke. The world has changed.
We should not be afraid to proclaim the truth, even if at times it is uncomfortable.
Pope Francis.
It's now clear that micro and nanoplastics are not just environmental pollutants. They're dangerous to our health and our well-being. These invisible particles have already changed our world because what was once beneficial to our health has now become harmful and even dangerous. And today, these tiny plastics are everywhere and in everything. Even these fresh fruits contain them. As a result, micro nanoplastics have infiltrated our bodies, disrupted the cellular and molecular functions, and their consequences are already evident. For example, autism spectrum disorder, which affected 1 in 10,000 children in the 1970s, now affects 1 in 36, and this number keeps rising. Infertility rates are also increasing, affecting not just individuals, but the future of society. Strokes and cardiovascular diseases, once linked to an old age, are now striking people in their 30s and 40s. These trends are deeply concerning, but with the increase in micro nanoplastics in our environment, the prevalence and severity of these diseases will only worsen. As a result, we'll face not just a health crisis, but a decline of humanity.
We are caught in a trap. On one hand, we are accelerating the pollution of the planet and our lives with plastic. And on the other, we are unable to combat the consequences of this contamination. We are standing on the brink of an ecological and social catastrophe that is no longer something abstract. It is a very real threat to our survival. Each day, we lose the capacity needed to counteract these challenges. A healthy lifestyle will not save us. Micro and nanoplastics are so small that they infiltrate the soil, rivers, oceans, and water supply systems. There is no escape from this pollution. They are in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and even in breast milk. These particles can even penetrate through our skin. Every day, the amount of this contamination grows. No matter what we do, eating only organic food, drinking pure spring water, wearing clothing made of natural materials, we all breathe the same air saturated with microplastics. The world has changed, but we have not yet realized it. What was once considered healthy food has turned out to be more harmful and dangerous than what was once labeled unhealthy. The damage caused by nanoplastics in a carrot, cabbage, or apple is far greater than the harm from carcinogens in a steak or a burger with fries. This is because the plastic that destroys us from within is far more dangerous than carcinogens. Even something as simple as being by the sea has become hazardous. The sea breeze, which once revitalized us, now carries with it a fresh dose of nanoplastics. Sunbathing on the beach or swimming in the ocean exposes our bodies to even more of these particles. They infiltrate through our breath, our skin, and even our sweat glands, affecting our entire system. And high temperatures only amplify this effect.
After spending time at the sea or in the forest, more and more people are experiencing unexplained fatigues, frequent colds, or even serious illnesses. While we may not recognize the cause yet, Many of these symptoms are linked to the rising levels of micro and nanoplastics in our body. An important point here is that the tiny plastics that we consume through food and water, they can be partially excreted. But nearly all of the plastics that we breathe in through our noses accumulate in us, especially in our brains. And no matter where we are on the planet, we will breathe in these particles. But note that the concentration of micro and nanoplastics in the air are typically lower in high altitudes, dry grasslands and deserts, or in major cities. And there, we can avoid inhaling plastic fragments just slightly. On the other hand, the concentration of tiny plastics are much higher in the forests or open water bodies, especially in the warm weather. So a relaxing summer day at the beach, that's like taking a tour around a Chernobyl reactor because micro and nanoplastics are as dangerous as radiation. The difference is that while we understand how to manage radiation exposure, we've yet to figure out how to protect ourselves from these tiny plastic particles, which accumulate and destroy our bodies from within. Unfortunately, their concentration is growing each year, and so too will their effect on our health. To protect ourselves and our children, it is important to avoid forests and open waters, and it's better to live in deserts, major cities, or plains at high altitudes where it is well ventilated and humidity is low. But right now, we don't have an easy way out of the crisis. In the years ahead, our society will have to clean the micro and nanoplastics, as well as recycle billions of tons of plastics accumulated on land and in the oceans. But note that some recycling methods can be harmful. For example, thermal processes like incineration and pyrolysis, which can convert plastics into fuel, should be avoided because they release large amounts of micro nanoplastics into the air. Particles smaller than 100 nanometers are especially concerning because the current filtration technologies struggle to capture them at the source effectively. If we smell burning plastics, we're already inhaling air filled with these tiny particles, and they will have negative consequences on our bodies. Therefore, burning plastics to generate fuel is a method that should be avoided because such fuel will cost our health, and we should choose the plastic recycling method very carefully. The world has changed, and if we want to protect ourselves, we must find a way out before it is too late.
Urgent measures. The first step toward restoring ecological balance should be the widespread adoption of atmospheric water generators, AWGs. These devices produce drinking water from the air, effectively filtering out pollutants, including microplastics. If such devices are used universally for all types of consumers, including industrial and household needs, they could significantly purify the atmosphere and oceans within a few years. But we must also rethink water treatment systems. We need to reconfigure treatment facilities so that used water isn't discharged into reservoirs, but instead directed into the soil. After all, soil contains microorganisms capable of breaking down nanoplastics. Scientists have identified bacteria that can degrade polyethylene and polyethylene terephthalate. In the upper layers of soil, plastic concentrations will remain high, just as they are in water bodies. But as water seeps deeper, it will naturally purify itself. Bacteria living in the soil will break down tiny nanoplastic particles. This is the only realistic and effective method proposed so far to combat nanoplastics. This process not only cleans water but also restores ecosystems, reducing pollution levels in oceans and the atmosphere. The more water we divert into the ground, the more these beneficial microorganisms will multiply. This natural filtration will gradually cleanse the environment. Over time, the water will filter into deeper layers and eventually return to the oceans purified. Moreover, If AWG units are placed in deserts and we extract moisture from the air while redirecting used water into the soil and sand, we could halt desertification and transform deserts into oases. The widespread adoption of AWGs and water filtration through soil will allow us to progressively rid the oceans and atmosphere of nanoplastics. For more details on how AWGs can help clean the planet of micro and nanoplastics, watch the film Water from Air: The Path to Saving Humanity. Of course, alongside this, it's essential to implement globally coordinated programs for the collection and disposal of large plastic waste, as well as to promote conscious consumption and the responsible use of plastic materials. As of today, only 9% of plastic waste is recycled. However, this situation can be changed if recycling plastic becomes economically beneficial. To achieve this, it's important to create conditions where recycling is financially appealing to everyone involved in the process. This would not only open up new economic opportunities, but also help address environmental challenges. Without such incentives, considering current economic realities and human nature, the issue is unlikely to receive the attention and resources needed to resolve it. This film presents just a small fraction of the information available today about the harm caused by plastics. However, even this is enough to grasp the gravity of the situation. Moreover, the information shared here doesn't account for the escalation of climatic disasters. To understand the connection between plastics and climate change, you can refer to the report On the Progression of Climatic Disasters on Earth and Their Catastrophic Consequences on the ALLATRA Movement website. The highest value.
In recent years, people have invested billions into artificial intelligence, hoping to elevate our civilization to new heights of technological progress. But does this progress even matter if humanity's survival is at risk? Male fertility continues to decline. Female infertility is also becoming the norm. And in the coming decades, 50% of our children could be born with autism spectrum disorder. Diseases will spread like epidemics. Yet, at this point, giving up plastics will not help us because it's already inside of us. So let's face reality and honestly ask ourselves, can we solve the plastic problem before our brains are replaced with plastics and we are no longer capable of thinking? Or is this already the end? What we've learned today point to one thing: that humanity has very little time left. We're trapped in a situation that we've created for ourselves. So we can forget everything we have learned today and continue to live as before. That will be fatal. Or we need to find a solution urgently while we still are able to think. Sounds terrible, right? While we still are able to think. It's just so hard to believe that life has changed, and we don't want to change it. But the reality is that everything we have uncovered today, this is the absolute truth.
Trap for humanity.